Hi, this is Ken Wright. I'm a docent at the Marshfield Air Museum, and this is some of the equipment I used myself during the war, and some of it similar to what I used, not actually mine. But the classic point up here is the aviation jacket. I did 2 years flying with the Marine Corps back in the 1950s down at El Toro, 1954 to 56, and that was the jacket. Of course, we've got something like 30,000 jackets here, but the unique thing about that is the patch. It shows the RAF and the USMCAL, the American Marine Corps, so that makes it quite rare. There are not too many around. The rest of the stuff in here, the uniform is mine, the N was Navigator Brevet. We didn't have the full wings like the Americans did. The Brevet was quite brief. Only a pilot had a double set of wings. The navigator, engineer, air gunners, wireless operators all had separate emblems, usually with just an initial S or an E or whatever on that. That was the B. B was for bomb aimer, N for navigator, E for engineer, and so on. The uniform itself, his rank was a flight lieutenant, same as a captain in the American Marine Corps at that time, or the American Air Force. The flying boots of the type I used during my bailout time, when I bailed out of the Halifax. That's the model up on top of the screen there. The Mark III, which had the square tail. The Mark I had a diamond-shaped tail, which was very dangerous. It couldn't fly on 3 engines. You lost control. They eventually modified it, and it became a damn good bomber. It was used in all sorts of roles. Anyway, it carried a crew of 7, pilot, engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, 2 air gunners, and a wireless operator, crew of 7. To get out of it, you had a hatch at the front on the floor, beneath the seats for the navigator and bomb aimer sat side by side, and then the back entrance hatch at the back end. The tail gunner, he could turn his turret 90 degrees and open both doors and fall out backwards. The trouble is, his parachute was inside the aircraft, so he had to get into the aircraft to get his chute and then go back on the turret, and of course he was right beside the main escape hatch, so he'd go out that way instead. But if he could have been able to keep his parachute on during flying over Germany, he'd been able to do that, turn the turret 90 degrees and fall out backwards. Anyway, that's that side of it. My 3 things are common only to airmen. That's the Parachute Club, which is the Caterpillar Club, and then there's the Goldfish Club, and there's the Flying Boot Club. And only airmen can, and not in the list, but they can become members of that. The Caterpillar Club is if you bail out of an aircraft to save your life using an IRVIN type parachutes, IRVIN, no E, just IRVIN alone, who created the parachute anyway. He did that when he was 12 years old. Interesting man, had done about 65 jumps, never was a member of his own club because his jumps were all done and controlled, not in an effort to save his life. He was doing it for demonstration and for testing various chutes he developed over the many years. His company brought out the symbol of the caterpillar, because the caterpillar hangs by a silk thread before it becomes a butterfly and flies away. Of course, parachutes were made of silk in those days, which was quite common. After the war, of course, when all the POW camps emptied and we got all these air crew back to Britain and America, having been shot down over Germany, almost bankrupted the company who had so many applications for their badges. And you get 3 things. You get a badge, which is 14 karat gold, it's about you can see in here, and there's 2 red ruby eyes in the thing. You get a little card as well, showing you haven't jumped out to save your life. And the third thing you get is continued life, which is the critical part. So the Goldfish Club, George H.W. Mish was a member of both. He bailed out over the Pacific when he got shot down, and he was in a rubber dinghy before he was picked up by an American submarine and brought back. So he's a member of both the Goldfish Club and the Caterpillar Club. The Flying Boot Club, kind of rare, because that involved people who'd been shot down or crashed in Germany and got in with the underground in either France, Belgium or Holland, and managed to work their way down to either Spain or into Switzerland. That way they would then qualify for the Flying Boot Club. So we had those three, which were quite unique to airmen only. It's a kind of a unique thing. The other stuff in here, the flying boots, they were common in the RAF to begin with. We later replaced them because when I bailed out, I lost one of the boots. It came off when the chute opened and it sailed away into the dark of night. Oddly enough, my mid-upper gunner found it in the forest the next day when he was heading back to our lines. We landed in Patton's Third Army area, so we're in friendly territory, so it wasn't a big problem for us at all. But anyway, it was quite unique finding that boot in the forest, and I got my boot back. So you can see the picture up there, which is there. During the war, I was a bomber navigator, and on the tall guy on the left was my navigator, and the one in the middle was a Pathfinder air gunner. He'd flown these 2 tours on the missions over Germany, and I was working in a ground job in Paris, which we had occupied France by that time and were pretty well further down near the German border. So we landed in Patton's Third Army, who were very, very helpful, had a whole routine of what to do with aircrew, what happened to descend in their area, and they took care of us pretty well. I got 4 of my crew were with me. We were flown up to Paris and then handed over to the RAF chap there. That was taken outside the Church of La Madeleine in Paris, and it was in 1945, and from there the Americans flew us back to England, and we eventually got back to our squadron. So that was the history of that picture up there. The other stuff in here, my hats of war routine, the equipment down here, the stuff I used, I've got my logbook showing the date of when I jumped, and the time. It was about 3:30 in the morning. They put it down to carburetor icing on all 4 engines, and the aircraft was yawing back and forth when we got the order to jump. We were pretty low at the time, about 3,500 feet. It was over, not mountainous territory, but a few hills around. Of course, if you hit one, it's academic what the height is. But anyway, we all got out okay. 5 of us did. Our tail gunner was a black guy from Jamaica, and he got badly bashed up because one of the doors on his tail turret only opened, and he was able to get out of about that much space, and it twisted his parachute harness, so when he clipped the parachute on, one thing didn't hook up, so when he jumped, that came loose and whacked him in the face and smashed all his face in. So he was taken over by the American Army, and they did a first-class job on him. I didn't see him till after the war, and he had metal bars instead of teeth, but he would be fitted up with false teeth later on. But he survived, and that was the main thing. The rest of 4 of us got out okay in one piece, and then the other 2, pilot and the engineer, managed to keep everything going, and they emergency landed on an American base further north, and eventually we were all dead. We'd been so low when we jumped, but we were thinking the other way around, because why the dickens did the plane still come in the air because we had plenty of fuel on board, but I'd expect to see a big explosion. But they managed to get the thing going again. Thought the carburetor was out and flew up north and made an emergency landing at an American air base in France, and then were picked up and flown back to the UK. So that was the history of our dash into Paris. We came back and then got back to base, and they didn't know we were alive till I happened to walk in the barn and see old Jeff sitting there looking a little bit sad and morose. But he was quite thrilled to see that so many of us had survived. In fact, all of us did. So he was quite happy with that. We didn't do many missions after that. Thank goodness the war finished. Anyway, the other equipment down here, the compass, that was used, a distant reading DRC, a distant reading compass. That was down at the back end of the aircraft, and we had repeaters up in the front end in the bombing section in the nose. It was in the bomb site. We had one in the navigator position, we had one on the pilot's position of repeaters that give you a pretty accurate cover on the accuracy of the heading you were on. And of course, there, the main compass being gyro stabilized and away at the back end of the aircraft, it was pretty well free of magnetic interference from different parts of the aircraft. So the accuracy of the compass and the readings were really, really good in those days. Today it's all GPS, but at that time it was highly technical. So that was what was there. We also had a normal compass like that one there, the Mach 9, and that was the liquid compass. And of course, the trouble with that, when you maneuvered the aircraft, it would be what we call compass swirl. The compass would take a little bit of time to settle down again while you move the liquid inside the compass, which was floating, everything was floating inside. So you had to take that into account when you were doing certain type of maneuvers. Really, quite a few other goodies in here. The pictures or the video going on virtually covers the whole of 20 years of Air Force. After the war, I was on transport to Berlin, Italy. I flew all over the Middle East, Far East, and that covers quite a few of them. Funnily enough, there's one shot up there when I was up in Karachi, landing at Moripur, the air base there, and I ran into my mid-upper gunner who was on the ground job at that time because the demobilization hadn't caught up with the end of the hostilities as we had them at that time. And so I don't know what happened to them after the war. Desmond, the guy on the left on that photograph, as a navigator, I hadn't seen him in 40 years. I found out they lived about 7 miles away from me on the west coast of California, and we got together and renewed quite a few old times over quite a few beers in the process. It was really interesting. He became a top-notch designer of golf courses. In fact, one of the top 5 men in the whole world, designing them all over the world, Japan, Middle East, down through Africa, everywhere. He was quite a few in America too. So he was quite famous, so we had quite a lot to talk about. But that was what we were looking like when we were both in the early 20s. I think I was 21 at that time. I've just turned 21, so yeah, I had quite a lot of hair back then. That's about it of what's on the cupboard here with the various bits and pieces. And we left off on my last talk was around about, I just finished 29 Squadron. We'd got rid of the mosquitoes and we're switching to NF-11s, Night Fighter 11s. It was the Gloucester Meteor Night Fighter. It was basically a 2-seat trainer aircraft. Had been modified to take the navigator in the back seat. I stuck a radar dish in the nose and made a night fighter out of it. And a very good one too. Trouble was performance. It couldn't get above 40,000 feet. And of course the Canberra and the B-47 were flying along around 45 to 50. So we couldn't shoot them down if we even tried. So, but they were okay for everything else, just about everything else. So that was my introduction into the jet fighter era. My tour with 29 Squadron was quite brief. I was only there for a few months. I enjoyed it immensely, and I suddenly was posted up to RAF Lucas in Scotland, which is pretty close to St Andrews, the home of golf, which was about 7 miles away. And that was very interesting. We reformed a squadron, which oddly enough had been the first night fighter squadron in the Royal Air Force, formed on June 12, 1918 at Hainault in Essex, down in England, and fought not quite with the technology we have now. It wasn't available then, but at least it had some history to it. Of the big thing in there, keep the faith thing, it was a propaganda banner we had during the war for all of that stuff. That was for everybody. The war was very personal to everybody in Britain at the time. Bombing, not so much up in Scotland, because the main place there that they wanted to get was the Orkney Islands for the naval base, and then for shipbuilding on the Clyde, where they built the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth. I happened to sail on the Queen Mary twice. Once during the war when I came to trade out in Canada, and after the war when I came over to fly with the Marines back in 1954. Anyway, that's part of another history section. The rest of the stuff up there was pretty interesting for its time. The medals, of course, I never had any major combat to speak of. So everything was a campaign medal, so everybody had them. There were no Victoria Crosses and Medal of Honours and stuff like that. I had never attained those ranks or acquired those deeds to merit an event like that, to be given those type of medals. They were won by some incredible aviators, both of every category, navigators, bomb aimers, whatever. Pilots, of course, were the main recipients, mainly from the Battle of Britain days, and then for various things like the Danbuster raids, with the 617 Lancaster Squadron that blew up the Mormon Eater dams. Just about everyone in the crew were given some medal or other, no matter which rank they were. So that was quite interesting. But the rest of the stuff in there are pretty generic for the RAF. The Americans had better equipment than we had in regards. These flight jackets were very, very good. They had a superior type because their aircraft, the gunners back in the tail end, or waist gunners, didn't have much in the way of protection because when it was minus 30 outside, it was the same inside. So they needed heated clothing, heated suits, and wore all sorts of equipment just to stay warm and do their job. And they really earned whatever medals they got just for being there. It was quite something. I met quite a few when I was flying here with the Marines in the 50s, and interesting people. And of course we had one or two who still work here in the museum, not from World War II. I think I'm the only one left, but all the others have passed on, unfortunately. But one who I knew quite well, Vernon Grimm, and Vernon was a B-17 pilot. He did his 25 missions and came back and was an instructor back in the States. So he had quite a very interesting career and acquired an awful lot of English habits, which I was happy to share with him on many occasions. So that basically covers this tiny little section of RAF. We have some other stuff, we haven't got room to display it yet, but doubtless Jeff will take care of that in the future. So that should pretty well end what was in the cabinet here. So we'll let it go at that. Thanks.